The hum of the space station's corridors was usually nothing more than background noise, the kind that could lull even the most vigilant crew into a false sense of normalcy. Today, though, it was particularly loud in the human's ears, as if the metal walls themselves were conspiring to amplify his anxiety. He shuffled along with a datapad in one hand, the other brushing against a railing that hummed faintly with the station's energy flow. In his head, he was rehearsing his usual greetings to higher-ranking officers, reminders about maintenance schedules, and the endless litany of protocols that he hoped would make him look competent. Of course, none of this could have prepared him for the collision that happened 6 minutes after he sent what he now realized was an incredibly ill-advised, flirty message to his boss. It was the kind of collision that made a person question the laws of physics, gravity, and their own reflexes. One moment, he was stepping around a crate, imagining how smugly he'd boast about his efficiency to his coworkers, and the next moment, the world tilted, the air vanished, and he found himself pressed against something impossibly solid. A sharp intake of breath, the subtle shift of long, deadly ears brushing against the side of his head, and the realization hit him like a plasma bolt. He had accidentally bumped into the rear of the alien vampire woman who commanded half the station's respect and fear. The initial moments were a blur. He felt her presence before he heard her words, a shiver of alien energy radiating like electricity along the corridor. Then came the voice, low, icy, and dangerously amused. "Do you want to die, human?" It rolled over him with the weight of an accusation and the hint of curiosity. His stomach did a complete somersault, and he tried to step back, only to stumble over his own feet in a comedy of panic that would have been embarrassing in any context. Let alone this one. He attempted a laugh, a weak, nervous sound that could have passed for a cough, and muttered, didn't mean to. Really?" The alien vampire woman's piercing gaze, gleaming faintly under the corridor's fluorescent lights, pinned him in place like a butterfly under a glass dome. He could feel the subtle twitch of her lips. Was that a smirk, or had he imagined it? Either way, it did nothing to ease the hammering of his heart. "What exactly did you not mean?" she asked, her tone deliberately slow, drawing out the syllables as if savoring his discomfort. The human gulped. "Bumping, into you," he stammered. His hand swept awkwardly toward the crate he had nearly tripped over, as if repositioning it might somehow erase the incident. "Totally accidental. Honest." He was praying that her long ears, swaying ever so slightly with her subtle movements, weren't picking up the tremor in his voice. The alien vampire woman studied him silently, her sharp eyes catching every micro-expression, every slip of emotion. Despite her fearsome reputation and the tales whispered in the mess hall, there was something in her observation that made him feel noticed. He could almost convince himself that she was intrigued, though his logical brain warned him that intrigue from a predator-class alien was a dangerous proposition. "Accidentally, she said finally, the words smooth and lethal, but with a trace of humor that he wasn't entirely sure he should recognize. "Perhaps you are fortunate that the corridor is crowded." He laughed again, more genuinely this time, but it came out as a strangled wheeze. "Fortunate, yes, definitely fortunate," he admitted, his nerves loosening slightly. The humor, though involuntary, seemed to draw a flicker of amusement from her. She tilted her head, long ears arching elegantly, and allowed herself a quiet chuckle that sent a shiver down his spine. It was alien, melodic, and entirely disarming. As the moment stretched, the human realized he had to speak beyond apologies. "I, usually don't cause, this level of, interaction," he admitted, gesturing vaguely at the space between them. She leaned slightly closer, and he immediately regretted the detail, imagining how close proximity might be perceived in her culture. Her scent, rich, sharp, faintly metallic, filled his senses. His internal monologue began to panic, forming sentences that made no sense even to him. "You are unusually nervous," she observed. The human's mind raced. Should he admit he was terrified? That the flirty message he had sent earlier was now making him question every career decision he'd ever made? Or should he deflect with humor, as he always tried to do when faced with authority? "I, Try not to die, he said lamely, earning a tiny sharp exhale of laughter from her, like the sound of a blade sliding from a sheath. Her amusement, brief but unmistakable, gave him a fragment of courage. He straightened, wincing at the movement, and said, "Next time, I'll try to, um, avoid bumps." The words were ridiculous, yet somehow they elicited another flicker of expression from her that he couldn't read, a softening of the edges that made the corridor feel impossibly tight and intimate. For a moment, the station seemed to disappear. No hum of machinery, no distant chatter, only the electric tension and the strangely magnetic presence of the alien vampire woman. She finally moved aside with a grace that was both deliberate and deadly, giving him the corridor and a chance to escape. He shuffled forward, heart racing, aware that he was alive only by some mixture of luck, charm, and her capricious amusement. But he couldn't shake the sense that this collision was the beginning of something far more complicated and far more intriguing than either of them anticipated. As he hurried toward his next task, attempting to act nonchalant while internally rehearsing every possible scenario of her reaction, he realized something strange. For all her menace, for all the stories about her ruthlessness, he was curious. And more than that, he was aware that the slightest interaction with her could change everything about his life aboard the station. The flirty message, the collision, the stolen glimpses of her expression, all were building a tension he didn't yet understand, but couldn't ignore. Somewhere deep down, he knew the real adventure had just begun. The next morning, the station's corridors felt different, charged with the faint hum of anticipation that only came when someone's life, or ego, had narrowly escaped obliteration. The human moved with careful steps, glancing at the reflection of his face in the polished steel walls. He wasn't sure if he looked guilty, anxious, or just ridiculous, but he knew the alien vampire woman's gaze would find the answer before he did. That fleeting interaction yesterday had left his thoughts in a tangled mess, each memory of her sharp features and long ears replaying with a mix of dread and a surprising sense of excitement. He tried to focus on his routine maintenance checks, the hiss of hydraulic pistons and the click of tools offering a comforting rhythm. Yet every metallic clang made him jump slightly, half expecting her to appear from some hidden panel, eyes gleaming with otherworldly amusement. He had barely started calibrating the energy conduits in Hangar 3 when the overhead lights flickered. A subtle signal he was supposed to ignore, but he didn't. His hand froze on the tool, and his heart skipped a beat as the sound of gliding footsteps echoed through the cavernous space. Not the casual, uneven steps of a human coworker, but the measured, confident stride of someone who knew precisely how to command both attention and fear. He tightened his grip, tried to remind himself that he could run if necessary, but the staircase to escape seemed irrelevant when the predator was already in the room. And then she was there, standing at the edge of the hangar, the ambient lights glinting off the dark, sleek armor that marked her as both an enforcer and a noble in the same breath. Her eyes caught his before he even fully registered her presence, and he felt the air shift, charged with the unmistakable electricity of raw power, restrained only by choice. The long, pointed ears twitched slightly, a subtle motion that somehow amplified the authority radiating from her form. He swallowed and reminded himself, "Don't panic. You survived yesterday. This is just conversation. Probably." "Human," she said, her voice cutting through the hum of machinery, low, smooth, and hinting at amusement. He looked up, ready to apologize for any number of infractions, imagined or real, when he noticed something different. She didn't seem angry, not entirely. There was curiosity in her gaze, a faint upward tug at the corner of her lips, like she was privately entertained by the recollection of yesterday's incident. The human blinked. Had the predator just been amused? I, morning, he managed, a tremor betraying his attempt at casualness. He adjusted the datapad in his hands, wishing it would suddenly develop a function that allowed it to shield him from her stare. "I didn't expect you," he added lamely. The words sounded absurd even to his own ears. Her gaze swept the hangar, assessing the machinery, the systems, and then landed back on him, long and calculating. "I came to ensure the work you did yesterday was functional," she stated, voice smooth, but layered with an underlying playfulness. He wasn't sure humans even had a word for that, a sensation that was at once terrifying and oddly flattering. "You tend to be reckless." "Yes, ma'am. Reckless, but effective?" He forced a nervous grin, hoping his humor would land. It did, just barely. She allowed herself a small chuckle, the sound resonating in the hangar like liquid metal, precise and controlled, yet hinting at unpredictability. As he guided her through the inspection, pointing out energy nodes, calibration logs, and environmental adjustments, he noticed the way she leaned slightly over consoles, how the light caught the subtle glint in her eyes, how her presence seemed to warp the air around them. He couldn't help but make the occasional quip, small jokes about the temperamental AI systems, or the way the station's maintenance bots seemed to have personal grudges. To his surprise, she laughed softly at one particularly absurd complaint about the bots' propensity to rearrange storage crates according to their own algorithmic whims. The sound caught him off guard, breaking some invisible barrier he hadn't realized existed. Halfway through the inspection, the human accidentally knocked a small diagnostic tool off a console. It skittered across the metallic floor, sparks flying harmlessly but loudly. His reflexes screamed to bend, retrieve, and apologize simultaneously. But before he could act, she moved, silent, predatory, but quick, catching the tool midair with a single fluid motion. The movement was so effortless, so precise that he found himself blinking, mouth open, entirely impressed. "You, have quick reflexes," he managed to say, feeling foolish, yet incapable of hiding his admiration. Her lips curved ever so slightly. "You survived yesterday. That required quicker reflexes than you think," she replied, her tone teasing yet pointed, a reminder of yesterday's collision. She handed him the tool, their fingers brushing for an instant that felt impossibly long. The human felt a jolt, a mix of alarm and curiosity that settled deep in his chest, and he quickly diverted his gaze to the console in front of him, willing himself to remain professional. The inspection continued with an unspoken rhythm. His jokes, awkward, fumbling, were met with rare smiles and fleeting laughter. Her questions, subtle and precise, revealed layers of her intelligence and caution, each inquiry a challenge, a puzzle, a game he wasn't sure he wanted to win but couldn't resist trying. By the time they concluded the checks, he realized the corridors no longer felt suffocating. They felt alive, charged with the potential of something neither of them fully understood yet, a strange combination of tension, amusement, and undeniable attraction. As she finally prepared to leave, she paused at the hangar door. The human froze, wondering if the gravity of her gaze would push him off his feet. Then she turned slightly, a hint of a smirk playing on her lips. "Perhaps, human, you may not be entirely unbearable," she said, the words deliberate, slow, and infinitely tantalizing. And with that, she vanished down the corridor, leaving him to stare after her, heart racing, mind reeling, and a faint smile breaking across his face. For the first time, he realized that surviving a collision could be the least interesting part of the adventure. Something far more compelling was beginning, an intricate dance of wit, power, and unexpected connection between a human and the enigmatic alien vampire woman who had, against all odds, left him both terrified and utterly captivated. The day stretched long, each hour punctuated by the hum of ion engines and the rhythmic clatter of maintenance bots in the hangar. Yet the memory of her presence lingered like a magnetic field, pulling at his thoughts with relentless insistence. He found himself replaying the moments over and over, the sharp curve of her smile, the way her long ears tilted subtly when she focused, the unexpected warmth that belied the deadly precision she carried with her. Even the smallest gestures, the way she caught that diagnostic tool midair, the faint teasing in her voice, seemed to have left imprints in his mind, each one a tiny spark of fascination he was both thrilled and terrified to acknowledge. He tried to immerse himself in his routine, calibrating thruster arrays and checking plasma conduits, But even the simplest tasks seemed colored by her lingering presence. A misplaced rivet would send him flinching, half expecting to see her standing silently behind him, evaluating his every movement with that piercing gaze. And yet, when he imagined her amusement at his blunders, a smile crept onto his face despite his better judgment. It was a dangerous, intoxicating combination. Fear and fascination mixed with the thrill of her unpredictable attention. By mid-afternoon, the hangar doors shuttered open, letting in a stream of violet-hued sunlight that scattered across polished steel surfaces. The human paused, tool in hand, thinking it might be a supply ship arriving. But then he saw her. There she stood, as if materializing from the light itself. Her armor gleamed, catching the rays, and the long, elegant lines of her form exuded a confidence that made the room seem smaller, more contained by her presence. He felt a jolt of both dread and anticipation. Why was she back? Had he done something wrong? Or worse, had she come to see just how reckless humans could truly be? Human, she said, voice like liquid metal sliding over steel. There was no malice, but an unmistakable edge of scrutiny. You appear distracted, he stammered, trying to compose himself, but his words tangled like faulty wiring. I, uh, I was just running diagnostics, he managed, lifting a wrench as if it would make him appear competent. She raised an eyebrow, a subtle tilt that carried both amusement and disbelief, and he realized immediately that his flustered bravado had failed spectacularly. She stepped closer, gliding across the hangar floor with a grace that seemed to defy physics, each step measured yet effortless. He felt the gravitational pull of her attention, the air thickening with the unspoken acknowledgement of yesterday's incident. He knew he should apologize again, bow, or do something profoundly human to demonstrate contrition, but before he could, she placed a hand on a console, leaning slightly to inspect the readings, and a faint smirk curved her lips. Perhaps you're not as clumsy as you appear, she said, the words a teasing accusation that made his pulse accelerate in ways that had nothing to do with fear. The human swallowed, attempting humor as a shield. I like to think I add character to the station, he quipped, though the words felt absurd as they left his mouth. Surprisingly, she chuckled, a soft, melodic sound that seemed to reverberate through the hangar, teasing and unrestrained. The sound was so unexpected that he had to stop himself from staring at her as if she had performed a magic trick. And in a way, she had. She had disrupted the rhythm of his day, his carefully ordered life, with nothing more than presence, movement, and a voice that carried both authority and amusement. She guided him through a series of maintenance checks, her gaze never leaving him entirely. She asked questions, sharp, probing, but laced with subtle humor that caught him off guard. Each answer he offered seemed to be weighed, measured, and met with a small smirk or a knowing tilt of her head. He realized with a jolt that she was not merely supervising. She was engaging him, challenging him, perhaps even testing how he responded under scrutiny and subtle intimidation. It was exhilarating, frightening, and maddeningly captivating all at once. At one point, he accidentally brushed against her side while reaching for a panel switch, and the world seemed to pause. Her gaze locked on him, sharp and assessing, yet there was a flicker, an almost imperceptible twitch at the corner of her mouth that suggested amusement rather than outrage. Careful, human, she murmured, her tone a mixture of warning and teasing. The human's face flushed, a heat rising that had nothing to do with the ambient temperature of the hangar. Yes, ma'am, he stammered, realizing that surviving a physical misstep was proving far more complicated than he had anticipated. They continued their work in an unspoken rhythm, punctuated by occasional banter and subtle challenges. The human made jokes about the quirks of the maintenance bots, their tendency to misplace tools, and the oddities of the station's energy fields. To his astonishment, she responded with dry wit, sarcastic comments, and rare moments of laughter, each one pulling him deeper into a strange, magnetic connection he could neither name nor resist. Their interplay became a delicate dance of tension and humor, authority and defiance, fear and fascination, blurring the boundaries between duty and something far more personal. By the time the inspection concluded, The human realized that the hangar no longer felt like a place of sterile machinery and monotonous tasks. It had transformed into a space charged with electricity, possibility, and unspoken questions. He watched her as she turned toward the exit, the light catching her long ears and casting faint shadows across her sharp features. "Perhaps human," she said, pausing just before the doors. "You may yet survive more than one day in my presence." There was a glint in her eye, a promise of challenges and intrigue to come, and with that she departed, leaving him to process the heady mixture of relief, excitement, and anticipation that now defined every pulse of his racing heart. The morning light filtered through the hangar's reinforced panels, casting long shadows across the floor, and he found himself already anticipating her arrival before the station's automated announcements could signal it. He had spent the night replaying the previous day's encounter, each memory tangled with equal parts dread and excitement. The realization that she might appear at any moment kept his pulse irregular, yet it also sharpened his focus, making even the mundane inspection of plasma conduits feel like an event of cosmic importance. There was a thrill in that anticipation, the kind that made hands tremble slightly while holding a perfectly ordinary wrench. When she entered, the subtle click of her boots against the metal floor carried authority, yet there was an unmistakable casualness to her stride, a fluidity that seemed to mock the very concept of intimidation. Her long ears swiveled as if picking up frequencies beyond human comprehension, scanning the hangar with a precision that made him feel both observed and strangely protected. She carried no weapons, at least none visible, but the aura of danger around her was palpable, a magnetic field of power that drew his attention and heightened his awareness in every direction. He caught himself straightening tools, adjusting panels, even brushing imaginary dust from his uniform, though he knew she could barely see the difference. "Human," she said, voice low and smooth, the words stretching across the space between them like an unspoken challenge. There was a hint of amusement beneath the formality, a teasing edge that made him wonder whether she came for work or for something more personal. He cleared his throat, struggling to muster a reply that would convey competence without betraying the fluster that surged beneath his skin. "Morning, ma'am. All systems nominal," he said, aware immediately that it sounded both rehearsed and inadequate. Her gaze settled on him, sharp and assessing, but then she smirked, a quick, nearly imperceptible curl of her lips that suggested she knew exactly the effect she had on him. "Nominal," she repeated, tone lightening slightly. "We'll see how long that lasts." It was a sentence filled with promise and warning simultaneously, and he felt an odd mix of fear and anticipation. There was humor in her delivery, though it came with an undercurrent of threat, a reminder that even small interactions with her could carry consequences beyond his understanding. They moved through the hangar together, examining energy relays and gravimetric stabilizers, her presence altering the rhythm of every task. He found himself fumbling through explanations, pointing to components he had checked countless times, but now described with exaggerated confidence in an attempt to impress her. She leaned closer at intervals, inspecting his work, and each proximity sent a ripple of tension through him, one moment amusing, the next electrifying. She asked questions that were simple on the surface, but carried layers of expectation, prompting him to think quickly, adjust, and improvise. Her long ears twitched slightly when he answered correctly, a subtle acknowledgement that made him feel simultaneously proud and exposed. At one point, a maintenance bot malfunctioned, spilling coolant across the floor, and he cursed under his breath, grabbing a mop while trying to avoid slipping. She observed with crossed arms, raising a single eyebrow. "You're fortunate the station's automated defenses aren't sentient," she remarked dryly, and he couldn't help but chuckle, the tension easing for just a heartbeat. "Or they might have liquidated me for clumsiness," he quipped, and the corner of her mouth twitched. It was not a full smile, but the hint of amusement was enough to make him feel victorious. As they continued, she shared fragments of her own experiences, recounting missions and encounters across distant star systems. Each story revealed her mastery, her intellect, and the subtle nuances of a life that humans could scarcely imagine. Yet even in her tales of danger and conquest, there was humor, a sharp, sardonic wit that cut through the intensity, and forced him to pay attention not only to the technical details of her experiences, but to the rhythm of her speech, the pauses, and the laughter that hinted at a personality far richer than her formidable reputation suggested. He began to understand that she commanded not just through power, but through intelligence, charm, and the rare ability to see beyond the surface. Eventually, they arrived at a section of the hangar where repairs on an older starcraft required delicate calibration. Her movements were precise, graceful, and authoritative, and she guided him through each step, not simply giving orders, but creating a subtle dialogue of gestures, glances, and instructions. It was a dance of cooperation and challenge, one where humor slipped through in minor quips about misaligned conduits and stubborn circuitry. He realized that his nervous jokes were being received, considered, and sometimes even countered with her own sharp wit, creating a connection that was as playful as it was tense. Hours passed in this blend of work, conversation, and subtle interplay, until the first warning lights of the evening shift flickered on. He felt exhaustion settling into his limbs, yet the energy in the hangar was different now, charged, alive, as if the space itself had transformed under the influence of her presence. She stepped back, surveying the completed work with an approving nod, and for a moment, the tension that had coiled around him eased, replaced by a cautious pride. "You've improved," she stated simply, tone neutral yet carrying weight. It was a statement that felt like both reward and challenge, and he knew it was an invitation for more, for continued engagement, for the unspoken game that had begun the moment their paths collided. As she turned toward the exit, her ears catching the faintest vibrations, she glanced back over her shoulder. "Tomorrow, human," she said, voice carrying a note of expectation and amusement, "we will see if your hands are as steady as your nerves." And with that, she departed, leaving him alone in the hangar, a mixture of relief, exhilaration, and anticipation surging through him. The human realized, with both fear and excitement, that this was only the beginning of a series of encounters that would challenge his skills, his courage, and the fragile line between intimidation and fascination. The hangar hummed with quiet energy, the subtle vibrations of StarCraft engines and maintenance drones creating a rhythm that seemed to sync with his own racing heartbeat. He was hunched over the plasma conduits again, trying to concentrate on the delicate alignment of the flow regulators, but the memory of her voice, sharp yet teasing, kept intruding on his thoughts. He had replayed the previous day's encounter countless times in his head, each repetition highlighting the absurdity of his own nervousness. If anyone else had seen him muttering to himself while adjusting conduits, they might have assumed he had finally lost his mind. But the idea of her observing him, even in imagination, was strangely exhilarating. The entrance hissed open and she appeared, long ears tilting as though scanning for irregularities in the environment, her eyes narrowing in a way that immediately sent his pulse spiking. She moved with that unnerving grace, every step measured, deliberate, but there was a hint of something almost playful in the tilt of her head. He straightened instantly, trying to adopt a posture that communicated competence without looking stiff, and failing spectacularly as usual. "Good morning," he said, voice slightly higher than intended. "I prepared the conduits for recalibration." She didn't comment on the obvious tremor in his tone, merely stepping closer and glancing at the equipment. Her hands hovered near the regulators, long fingers brushing over controls with a precision that made him feel simultaneously inadequate and captivated. "Interesting," she murmured. "You've altered the cooling matrix alignment. A bold choice, human." He blinked. Bold. He'd been trying desperately to avoid a catastrophic meltdown, not make a stylistic statement. "Well," he said cautiously, I sometimes take risks." Her lips twitched, the hint of a smile threatening at the corner. They worked in silence for a few minutes, the hum of machinery filling the space between them, until a small maintenance drone veered too close to the conduit array. He lunged instinctively to redirect it, knocking his knee against a support beam. "Ow," he muttered, hopping slightly, and she lifted an eyebrow. "Clumsy, yet energetic," she observed, her tone light but precise. The remark drew an embarrassed chuckle from him, and he couldn't resist adding, "I prefer enthusiastic." Her eyes flicked to him, sharp, assessing, and yet there was no reprimand, only the faintest glimmer of amusement. As they adjusted the conduits together, she began recounting a mission on the outer rim of her fleet's territory. Her description was vivid, detailing ambushes by rogue AI drones in treacherous gravity wells, and he found himself captivated by the story. She spoke with the authority of someone who had survived countless conflicts, yet her narrative contained wry observations and dry humor that reminded him she was more than a warrior. She was cunning, clever, and fully aware of the absurdity in even the most dire situations. At one point, she mimicked the erratic behavior of a malfunctioning drone, and he couldn't help but laugh aloud, the tension easing from his shoulders for the first time that morning. "You laugh too easily," she said, her voice low, almost teasing, as she continued to tweak the conduits. "It could betray your intentions in the field." He grinned sheepishly. "Well, I'm not in the field yet." Her eyes narrowed slightly, scanning his expression, but there was no accusation. Just a flicker of recognition, as if she understood the delicate balance between charm and risk. They exchanged a few more quips while working, subtle tests of wit and timing, creating an unexpected rhythm between danger and levity, fear and fascination. The final calibration required them to step dangerously close to one another, hands brushing over the same control panels, the heat of proximity making his pulse thrum audibly. She noticed, of course, and instead of recoiling, she leaned in slightly, whispering instructions that mingled technical terminology with undertones that made his mind race in entirely inappropriate directions. "Careful," she murmured. "This sequence demands precision. One slip." He gulped, focusing intently, pretending to ignore the closeness, but every movement was exaggerated, deliberate, a performance of competence that hid the underlying storm of nerves and excitement. As the last sequence completed, a soft green light blinked, signaling a perfect calibration. Relief and pride surged through him, but she didn't celebrate outright. Instead, she straightened, eyes meeting his with a rare softness that seemed at odds with the deadly reputation he had internalized. "Well done, human," she said. "Efficiency and flair. A curious combination." He felt the compliment warm his chest, mingling with the lingering thrill of their shared proximity. They began to step back, preparing to review the next section of the hangar when she paused, tilting her head. "Do you realize," she asked, voice low, "that the sequence we just completed could have destroyed the plasma conduits if mismanaged?" He nodded, a nervous grin spreading. I I might have felt a little adrenaline," he admitted. Her lips twitched upward in a more visible smile this time. "Adrenaline suits you," she said. "It may save your life someday, or complicate it." He laughed, genuinely this time, and for a moment, the tension, the fear, and the awkwardness of their first encounter felt entirely transformed. They were no longer simply human and alien, superior and subordinate, but two beings negotiating space, skill, and the subtle dance of power and attraction. The hangar's hum seemed almost celebratory, and as she moved toward the exit, she glanced back over her shoulder. "Tomorrow," she said, voice carrying a playful edge, "we tackle the gravimetric stabilizers. Try not to trip over anything this time, human." He straightened, chest puffed with pride and nerves, replying, "I'll do my best, ma'am." And as the hangar doors sealed behind her, he realized that the mundane work of calibrations, drones, and conduits had become the backdrop for an intricate game of wit, courage, and subtle connection. A game he was entirely unprepared to resist, yet couldn't imagine not playing. The first sparks of fascination, challenge, and humor had ignited, promising a tangled, thrilling path that stretched far beyond the simple tasks of maintenance. The morning air in the hangar was thick with the scent of ionized metal and engine coolant, a smell that had somehow become oddly comforting to him over the past few days. He adjusted the gravity compensators on the starship's outer hull, crouching to align the conduits, when the hiss of the entrance vent made his pulse jump. She appeared, long ears tilting forward like finely tuned sensors, a faint smirk playing on her lips. "You've already started," she remarked, stepping over a stray maintenance cable, with a grace that made him momentarily forget to breathe. "I, yes, ma'am," he stammered, trying to sound competent while keeping his hands steady on the calibrators. I thought we should begin with the gravimetric stabilizers before the solar arrays heat up. Her gaze swept over his setup, noting the precise alignment and subtle improvisations he'd made to accommodate the ship's unique layout. Impressive, she said, her tone soft but authoritative, even if your methods are unorthodox. He felt a blush creep up his neck. Unorthodox was one thing, lethal was another, and he hoped he hadn't strayed too far into the latter. They worked side by side, adjusting the stabilizers with synchronized movements that were both mechanical and oddly intimate. She occasionally brushed against him, deliberately or not, and each touch sent a shockwave of awareness through his body. Her hands were precise, long-fingered, brushing over the same panels, her fingers almost tracing the paths his own hands followed. Careful, she murmured. One miscalibration and we could rip the hull. Open. He chuckled nervously. I promise I won't blow us up. Not today, at least. She glanced at him, a flicker of amusement in her eyes, and for a brief moment, the aura of danger softened into something almost playful. As they climbed to the upper sections of the hull, the ship's lights reflected off her pale skin, accentuating the elongated lines of her ears and the subtle shimmer of her hair. She glanced over her shoulder and quipped, You seem far too calm for someone in my presence. Are humans always this reckless? He swallowed hard, trying to maintain his composure. Depends on the human, he replied, allowing a small smirk to escape. She raised an eyebrow, the corners of her lips twitching with amusement, and the tension that had been coiling inside him loosened slightly. Midway through the calibration, a rogue drone swerved unexpectedly toward the stabilizer array. Instinctively, he lunged to intercept it, slipping on the alloy floor and nearly crashing into her. She reacted instantly, catching him by the arm with a grip that was firm but not unkind. Careful, human, she said, her voice low and teasing, or I may have to reconsider letting you operate the controls alone. His heart raced, but the warmth in her touch lingered, oddly grounding him. Noted, he muttered, still catching his balance. They paused for a moment on the catwalk above the engines, surveying the starfield through the reinforced viewport. The silence was comfortable, a shared space that didn't require words. Finally, she spoke, voice soft, almost contemplative. I trust you more than I expected. He blinked, startled by the admission. I appreciate that, ma'am, he said, though the formal title felt strangely constrictive. And I trust you'll keep me alive if I make a mistake. She let out a low, amused chuckle. Depends on the mistake, she replied, eyes glinting with mischief. As the day progressed, their work took them deeper into the ship's core systems. Gravity wells, plasma conduits, energy matrices. Each task required precision, coordination, and an almost imperceptible dance of awareness between them. She commented on his technique, sometimes critically, sometimes playfully, pushing him to refine his movements while testing the boundaries of their developing rapport. Every time their hands brushed, a spark of something unspoken passed between them, neither fear nor desire entirely dominant, but a tangled blend of both. During a particularly delicate sequence involving the core energy harmonizers, he misjudged a pressure valve, and the feedback pulse sent him staggering backward. She caught him again, closer this time, and muttered something about human reflexes being both fascinating and exasperating. His face heated, but he couldn't suppress a laugh. I'll try not to destroy anything else, he said, grinning despite the adrenaline surge. She shook her head slightly, though her smile betrayed her amusement. Just try not to get us vaporized, she replied, voice teasing yet firm. By the end of the day, the calibrations were complete, the starship humming smoothly under their combined adjustments. He felt a deep sense of accomplishment, not only for the work done, but for the rare moments of connection and levity shared amidst technical precision and near danger. She looked at him with a rare softness, eyes reflecting the lights of the hangar and the distant stars beyond. You performed well, she said quietly, far better than I anticipated. He felt a surge of pride, tempered with the thrill of knowing their partnership, precarious as it was, held both challenge and unspoken understanding. As she turned to leave, she paused at the hatch, glancing over her shoulder with that enigmatic expression that had both unnerved and intrigued him since their first encounter. "Tomorrow," she said, voice carrying that edge of command and playfulness, "we tackle the energy matrix recalibrations. Don't underestimate them." He straightened, attempting to appear confident while internally bracing for another day of tension, humor, and subtle flirtation. "Understood, ma'am. I'll be ready." And as the doors sealed behind her, he allowed himself a moment to breathe, realizing that beneath the technical challenges and near misses, a new dynamic was forming, one that balanced respect, attraction, humor, and danger in equal measure. Their interactions had become a game of skill, wit, and unspoken connection, a thrilling dance that neither fully controlled, yet both were entirely invested in. The hum of the hangar was louder than usual that morning, a low vibration that resonated through the metal grating underfoot. He adjusted the toolkit strapped to his belt, fingers brushing over the familiar contours of the devices, but the awareness of her presence made each movement deliberate, almost ceremonious. She appeared from the shadows of the maintenance bay, long ears tilting like finely tuned sensors, eyes reflecting the overhead lights with a sharp glint. "You're early," she remarked, her voice a mixture of admonishment and curiosity. He gave a sheepish grin, scratching the back of his neck. "I wanted to get a head start. Don't want to slow down the galaxy's deadliest vampire." She raised an eyebrow, lips twitching at the corners, a faint smirk betraying her amusement. They moved together toward the starship's mainframe, the air between them charged with an unspoken tension that was as much about anticipation as it was about the humming circuits and glowing conduits. She supervised his every action, sometimes silently, sometimes commenting with precise instructions that carried a subtle, teasing edge. "Careful with that flux stabilizer," she said, brushing past him in a way that made him acutely aware of her proximity. "I wouldn't want you to accidentally vaporize us both before breakfast." He laughed, a short, nervous sound, and replied, "Noted. I'll try to keep the explosions to a minimum." Their hands brushed repeatedly as they calibrated the energy conduits, a touch here, a guiding gesture there, each one sparking more than just electrical currents. He caught himself stealing glances at the subtle curve of her jaw, the way her long ears framed her face, and the occasional playful flick of her hair. She noticed, of course, and leaned slightly closer when he wasn't expecting it, murmuring a dry remark about human focus, or lack thereof. "Distracted human?" she asked, voice smooth and slightly teasing. "Always," he admitted, heart thudding, though he forced a grin, especially when working next to a terrifyingly competent vampire. The task for the day involved rerouting the ship's plasma conduits to stabilize the auxiliary drives, a procedure that required precision, trust, and a careful balance of nerves. He worked alongside her, adjusting the conduits while she monitored the readings, her hands occasionally brushing his in an almost casual manner that sent jolts of awareness through him. She commented on his technique, sometimes critically, sometimes humorously, highlighting his small errors with a sarcastic edge that made him chuckle despite the stakes. "I swear, if humans were this clumsy all the time, the galaxy would have collapsed decades ago," she said, shaking her head, though the corners of her mouth twitched in amusement. Midway through the recalibration, an unexpected energy surge caused the plasma conduits to flare, sending a burst of light and heat that made him stumble backward. Instinctively, she reached out, catching his arm with a grip that was firm yet unthreatening. "You've got to pay attention, human," she said, voice low, almost teasing, though the intensity of her gaze was unmistakable. He nodded, heart racing, muttering, I'm okay, I promise." Her long ears tilted slightly, reading his micro-expressions with uncanny precision. "Good," she replied softly, though a hint of a smirk lingered on her lips. "I'd hate for you to become a permanent part of the hull today." They resumed their work, moving in a rhythm that felt almost synchronized, an unspoken communication guiding their actions. She pointed out inconsistencies in his adjustments with surgical precision, and he countered with innovative solutions that surprised even her. "Not bad, human," she remarked, her voice carrying a faint undertone of approval. "You may be useful after all." He grinned, a mixture of pride and relief flooding him. "I aim to please." and survive. By the time they reached the final section of the plasma grid, the tension had shifted into something lighter, a dance of competence and playful banter. She leaned over a conduit, giving him a pointed look. "Try not to touch anything else that might explode," she said, though her tone lacked its earlier sharpness. He raised his hands in mock surrender, laughter spilling from him despite the lingering adrenaline. "No promises," he quipped. She let out a low chuckle, the sound rich and unexpected, and he realized that her presence, though intimidating, had become strangely comforting, even exhilarating. As they stepped back to inspect the fully calibrated system, the soft glow of the conduits reflecting in her eyes, she regarded him with an intensity that was both commanding and unexpectedly warm. "You've improved since yesterday," she noted, her voice calm yet carrying an unspoken weight. "Perhaps humans are more adaptable than I gave them credit for." He felt a swell of pride, tempered by the thrill of knowing how precarious their dynamic remained, a delicate balance of respect, tension, and the undercurrent of something unspoken. They concluded the day's work with a brief moment of quiet, standing side by side as the hum of the ship filled the space. She glanced at him, lips curving in that faint, enigmatic smile that made his pulse quicken. "Tomorrow," she said, voice soft yet authoritative, "we begin the final diagnostics. Don't get any ideas about slacking off." He laughed, feeling the warmth of camaraderie and the thrill of anticipation mingling. "Wouldn't dream of it," he replied, though inwardly he braced himself for whatever challenges and surprises she had in store. As she turned to leave, the lights of the hangar glinting off her figure, he realized that their interactions had grown into something far more intricate than mere professional collaboration. Every brush of her hand, every teasing remark, and every moment of tension had built a foundation of trust, amusement, and unspoken fascination. And though he could not predict what tomorrow would bring, he knew that the dance of proximity, competence, and subtle flirtation was far from over. The hangar was quieter than usual that evening, the usual hum of machinery replaced by the low, steady vibration of the ship's core in standby mode. He leaned against the railing, eyes tracing the intricate lines of conduits and energy nodes, feeling a sense of accomplishment that was tempered with the lingering awareness of her presence. She appeared at the far end, long ears catching the soft lighting, eyes gleaming with that same inscrutable expression he had come to decipher as a mixture of approval and amusement. "You've done well," she said, voice smooth, carrying both warmth and authority. He straightened, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Thanks. I mean, I had a good teacher." She tilted her head, a faint smirk playing across her features. "I suppose I can allow that," she replied, and in her presence, that allowance felt like a rare, priceless gift. They walked side by side toward the ship's diagnostic panel, the rhythm between them more fluid than it had been before. No sparks of panic, no sudden surges of adrenaline, just a quiet confidence born from weeks of working together, learning to anticipate each other's actions and finding humor in the tension that had initially defined their interactions. "You know," he started, glancing at her with mock seriousness, "I think I might actually enjoy recalibrating plasma conduits if it means getting to spend more time with you." She let out a low, incredulous laugh that resonated in the metal-lined hangar. "Careful, human," she teased. "Flattery might just be the death of you, or perhaps the start of something worse." They settled into the task, reviewing the final diagnostics for the auxiliary drives. His fingers moved with precision, guided by her subtle hints and the knowledge he had gained through trial, error, and occasional chaos. She watched him closely, occasionally reaching over to adjust a setting herself, their hands brushing in moments that had lost the sharp edge of embarrassment and gained the warmth of mutual trust. "You've improved remarkably," she noted, eyes narrowing slightly as she scanned the readings. "I was hesitant to rely on you fully, but you've earned my confidence." He felt a swell of pride, tempered by the gravity of the compliment. "I guess humans can learn a thing or two," he replied, grinning, and the tension in the hangar softened, replaced by something closer to camaraderie. As they finalized the adjustments, a minor fluctuation in the energy output caused the conduits to flare briefly, sending a flash of light across the panel. He reflexively reached to stabilize it, but she was faster, her hands steadying the field with a faint hum of power that made the air crackle with energy. "You're getting faster," she said quietly, not unkindly, and for the first time, he sensed the genuine respect beneath her usual controlled demeanor. "And you're getting less likely to trip over your own feet," she added, a hint of amusement in her voice. He chuckled, shaking his head. "Progress in both areas, I'd say." With the final diagnostic complete, they stepped back, surveying the ship's systems. Every panel glowed in harmonious cadence, every conduit stable, every energy node precisely calibrated. The satisfaction in his chest was immense, but it was rivaled by the subtle electric awareness of her standing beside him, a presence that had shifted from intimidating to invigorating, from distant to quietly intimate. She tilted her head, regarding him with a gaze that had lost none of its intensity but had gained a layer of softness. "You've changed," she said, voice low, almost contemplative. "Not just in skill, but in patience, focus, and perhaps even in understanding me." He met her gaze, recognizing the truth in her words. "I've learned from the best," he replied, and the corners of her mouth twitched, almost a smile. They walked toward the hangar exit together, their steps in sync, the usual sharp edges of their interactions softened by shared triumph and understanding. He realized that the initial tension, the accidental provocations, and the near catastrophes had evolved into something far more nuanced, an interplay of trust, playful banter, and mutual respect that neither had anticipated. She paused, glancing back at him, long ears catching the ambient light, eyes glimmering with unspoken meaning. "Tomorrow," she said, "we take on the main engines. If you thought today was challenging—" She let the words trail, but the promise of shared adventure hung in the air. "I'll be ready," he said, and for the first time, he believed it without hesitation. In the quiet aftermath of the day, he reflected on how much he had grown, not just in skill, but in understanding of her world, her rules, and the delicate balance of fear, respect, and attraction that had guided their interactions. He realized that she too had shifted, her commanding presence tempered by a recognition of his capabilities and a subtle fondness that he had only just begun to comprehend. The hangar, usually a place of work and tension, had transformed into a space of connection, of shared victories, and of the quiet thrill that comes from being seen, challenged, and understood by someone formidable. As the lights dimmed and the hum of the ship's systems settled into a steady rhythm, he felt a deep sense of closure and anticipation simultaneously. The story of their encounters, of accidental brushes and deliberate lessons, had reached a pivotal point, tying together fear, fascination, and unexpected camaraderie, and yet the horizon of possibilities stretched endlessly before them, missions to complete, challenges to overcome, and a bond that had grown from a collision of worlds into something enduring. He knew without doubt that the journey had changed him, reshaped his understanding of trust, power, and connection, and that whatever lay ahead, they would face it side by side, ready, wary, and profoundly alive.